Hi, Kevin Greene here. Welcome to Pathways to the Past. In my very first video, I told all that you needed to know about the east-west railroad line running through Seymour, which is the railroad running this direction. And I talked a little bit about the north-south line, which is running that way to the south and up that way to the north. But this video is going to concentrate on the details into what went into the north-south line coming through Seymour. So I'll find a seat and we'll get started. Now the early history of railroads in the state of Indiana goes back to the 1830s. In 1832, there was a company chartered called the Ohio and Indianapolis Railroad, and they were going to build a line from the Ohio River in Jeffersonville straight north to Indianapolis. But to get funding started took a while, and it was about 10 years before they actually started construction. The first railroad to actually start construction in the state was in 1836. It was called the Madison and Indianapolis Railroad, and it was a state-funded, state-owned line which was to run from Madison, Indiana, north and northwest through North Vernon to Columbus, and then straight north to Indianapolis. So construction began in it would be October of 1836. Early 1840s, the state was running into financial difficulties, so in 1843 the railroad was sold to a private organization which called themselves the Madison and Indianapolis Railroad Company. And by 1844 then that railroad arrived into Columbus and then started north to Indianapolis. See, in 1847 is when they finished the line all the way from Madison to Indianapolis. November the 1st, 1847, the first train arrived from Madison up to Indianapolis. By 1849, with only 27 miles of line having been laid so far on the Ohio and Indianapolis Railroad, that company was sold to reorganized and sold to a different organization. They renamed it the Jeffersonville and Indianapolis, or I've also heard it called just the Jeffersonville Railroad. That was in 1849. Of course, then get into 1852, and that's when Meade Shields was doing his thing here as far as laying out a new town to be built in Seymour. He knew that the north-south line that was being built would come across his land, and he wanted to capitalize on that. So he laid out his town of Seymour, 10 blocks. If you've seen my video on the early history of Seymour, it tells all about that. But in the summer of 1852, the north-south line, the Jeffersonville and Indianapolis line, came across his property, and then by fall of 1852 arrived into Columbus. Now the JM&I all this time was thinking that once they reached Indianapolis, they could come up with a deal with the JM&I Railroad, and that they could share the trackage from Columbus all the way to Indianapolis. That would save them time on building and hopefully be profitable for both of them. But the Madison and Indianapolis Railroad wasn't happy with that idea, so they refused to give them trackage rights on their newly laid tracks that they had made. So at that point, the JM&I started building a line right next to the JM&I going north out of Columbus. Then in November of 1852, Meade started selling lots in his newly laid town, and in the spring of 1853 is when stuff really started happening here, where buildings started being constructed, houses and stores were built. The line was finished going from Jeffersonville to Indianapolis, because in 1853, in November of 1853, the two railroads came to an agreement, and from Edinburgh on to Indianapolis they shared trackage, so that completed the line. However, from the beginning there was a pretty big feud between the citizens of the established town of Rockford north of here and Meady Shields with his new town. And Meady continually was trying to lure Rockford residents and businesses to move south a few miles and reestablish themselves in his new town, and did different things to get them to do that. However, the prominent citizens of Rockford were able to talk to the railroad officials on the north-south line that was made, and got them to agree not to stop in Seymour. So they built a nice station in Rockford, or a decent station. I don't know how nice it was, but they refused to stop in Meady's new town of Seymour. Even if they were flagged to stop, they would keep going. There seems to have been a store by Henry Wool's about 4th Street and Indianapolis Avenue that kind of acted as a train stop to drop off some supplies and that sort of thing at the new town. But besides that, I think if you had to get on a train, you would have to go to Rockford to do so. And in the meantime, Meady Shields had gotten into politics through the late 1840s. He was elected as a state representative for this area. Excuse me. And in early 1850s, he was elected as a state senator in 1852, and again in 1856 re-elected. And after he was re-elected as a senator in 1856, he started promoting a bill that would be enacted to be for the whole United States. And in this bill, he was saying for safety reasons, it should be required that all trains come to a complete stop before they cross another railroad tracks. In the meantime, in 1854, the east-west line, the Ohio and Mississippi, had decided to lay their tracks across Meady Shields' new town, so that's established the railroad crossing for the two railroads in Seymour. Now, I'm sure that Meady's intentions for this bill was to force the north-south line to stop in his town, but in reality it actually was a problem with this sort of thing across the whole eastern United States, and when the bill was eventually passed, it actually helped quite a few towns across the United States. So in March of 1857, the bill was passed, and that forced the Jeffersonville and Indianapolis Railroad to stop in Seymour. And so that means in 1858 they finally built a station here, a passenger station, but it was pretty insignificant, small wood frame, almost just a shack. This was located be just south and east of the railroad crossing, and it was just a small building. They did build a pretty nice stone freight house in conjunction with the Ohio and Mississippi Railroad as well, but that was in collaboration with the Ohio and Mississippi, which seemed to enjoy helping Meady with his new town. And as a reference to Seymour's growth in 1860, the population had grown already to 924 people in Seymour, which is more than double what was ever at Rockford. March of 1862, the Madison and Indianapolis Railroad was not making money. They were going into bankruptcy. The JM&I, the Jeffersonville and Indianapolis Railroad, was from the start pretty successful because of all the traffic, freight and passenger that they could get from the Jeffersonville, New Albany area, and even from across the river into Louisville. and so it was always a pretty profitable line, but there just wasn't enough freight and passenger traffic generated from Madison to Indianapolis to keep them going. So they were foreclosed and reorganized as a new company called the Indianapolis and Madison Railroad. That was in 1862. 1864, Seymour was incorporated into as a city, and at that point the population is recorded as 1,553 people. Moving on down my timeline, in May of 1866, the J&I Railroad bought out the Indianapolis and Madison Railroad, and it became known as the Jeffersonville, Madison, and Indianapolis Railroad Company, JM&I. Now, a lot of early histories of Seymour record the north-south line as the JM&I from the start, but that is not true. It started out as either the Jeffersonville Railroad or the Jeffersonville and Indianapolis Railroad. And then in 1866 is when it became the JM&I. August the 1st, 1871, the JM&I was bought out by the PCC and St. Louis Railroad, which was a part of the large Pennsylvania Railroad Company. PCC, I think, was Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Cincinnati and St. Louis. I'm not sure if that's correct, but I think that's right. As another reference point, in 1885, the population of Seymour has grown to around 6,000 people, so quickly growing town as Rockford becomes nearly nothing by this time. In November of 1886, finally the north-south line, as the Pennsylvania Railroad builds a nice new passenger station here. This station is one that I actually remember as a child, and it stood just north of the Tipton Street area along the railroad tracks, and it would have been on the west side of the railroad tracks. I'll go over there and show you where it was here. So the first Jeffersonville and Indianapolis passenger station that was built would have been about where these metal boxes on the other side of the tracks are located today, and the crossings over here, and where that JO Tower control box is, it would have been the location of the first Ohio and Mississippi passenger station, which was a smaller structure that stood right at that location. They later built a new station further east down the line, which I discussed in the Ohio and Mississippi history video. Then down this way would have been the new station, which I'll go down there and show you. So this raised asphalt pathway here would have been the platform for the passenger station, and where this curbing is basically the outline of where the station would have stood, with Jeffersonville Avenue right there. I think this is owned by the Jackson County Bank now. I went down from here. There were parking spots on this side, on the north side of the station, and there was a couple of parking spots down onto the south end as well. So it was basically in this area that you see right here. So the north-south line through Seymour from that point in 1871 all the way through to February the 1st, 1968 was the Pennsylvania Railroad, and things went pretty well for them. Problems with most railroads in the United States in the late 60s caused the Pennsylvania Railroad, the New York Central Railroad, and the New Haven and Hartford Railroad to merge together and become what was known as the Penn Central Railroad. That lasted for about 8 years, and it'd be April the 1st, 1976. That company and 7 other railroads across the United States were taken over by what was called the Consolidated Railroad Corporation, government-ran railroad, better known as Conrail. And that was in 1976 that they took over operations through Seymour. And not very long after that, they went through restructuring and streamlining operations, and that's when they tore down, either late 76 or early 77. I haven't found the exact date yet, but that's when they tore down the passenger station here in Seymour, the north-south passenger station. And that takes us up to the March of 1994. The line was purchased from Conrail. It was a 106-mile route from Louisville to Indianapolis, purchased by a company called the Louisville and Indiana Railroad. And they've done rather well with it. They've entered in agreements with CSX to have trackage rights on the line, and CSX helped them to greatly improve the signals and update the rails, and so they're in really good shape now. And that's the quick timeline of the history of the North-South Railroad through Seymour. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Bye.